ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of On the Wall with Jiu Jitsu Five-O. I'm very excited about our guest today. But before we get into that, as always, we got to get our sponsorships out of the way. So today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by random food that I have at my desk. OG hickory flavored sticks from Costco, low calorie, 9 grams of protein. Fresh Additions chicken bites, also a good source of protein, and ice cold Dr. Pepper Zero. I should also legally say that none of those companies have paid me any sort of money, and I'm not affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form, and neither is my guest, Rob Ingram from McDojo Life. So I've been wanting to have Rob on for a long time, and it's so cool to have you. I'm really excited to talk to you about bullshit martial arts. I'm excited to talk to you about all your social media channels because I've obviously been following you for a really long time, and it's really cool to finally get a chance to talk to you and do this podcast. So welcome to On the Wall.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the support. And also, I'd like to give a shout out to my non-sponsor, which is Poor Decision Beer. Poor Decision Beer, helping people make poor decisions. And if you're going to make a decision, make it a poor decision. Poor Decision Beer.
Love it. That's a good name for a beer. I feel like we should collaborate on that. And
it's a solid name for a beer. Like if you're
really
going to get hammered, you might as well be like, yeah, I had a couple poor decisions last night, and next thing you know, a midget and some tuna salad popped up, and we did some freaky things, and you're like, oh my god, Poor Decision Beer. That's a great.
I'm kind of surprised no one's thought of that yet.
I'm an idea guy. That's what I do.
There we go. Well, yeah, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience of the 4 people that are listening right now, and tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about McDojo Life, how that kind of came to fruition, how that got started, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm Rob. McDojo Life is the entity that I run, and I've been doing so now for about 12 years. I've been in the martial arts industry for 28 years, and I started when I was 12, so I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been, doing things in McDojo Life basically to call out fakes, frauds, phonies, conmen, pedophiles, sex offenders, and cults in the martial arts industry. And I love my job. I'm also the vice president of a company called Academy Safe. And Academy Safe is dedicated to try to get martial arts studios to do things that aren't required, but should be, like background checks, CPR first aid certification, cameras inside the studio, concussion course training, safe sport training. And our goal is to try to get studios to have a really more accountability for themselves than what's required in order to save lives.
Very cool.
I mean, I love my job.
And that's Academy Safe, right?
AcademySafe.org.
Okay.
So we've been growing. We actually just solidified a deal with Tap Cancer Out. So now a lot of the studios that will be working directly with Tap Cancer Out, they will now have to be Academy Safe certified to make sure that the students are safe.
Great. Yeah, that's a cool service. I feel like that's something that, obviously, like you said, gyms need that. It helps with liability, right? If there is an injury on the mats, it just holds people accountable to certain things. I think that's a really cool service. And also like the CPR certification and stuff that you talked about. I think that's like an invaluable tool that gym owners should have, or at least have their instructors certified, because unfortunately that stuff does happen. And it's nice to have somebody there that knows what to do if the medical emergency arrives or something. So I think that's really cool, man.
Yeah, it's important. Like the martial arts industry has been around since the dawn of time, since somebody balled up their fist, hit someone else, and someone else said, I think I can do that better. Then martial arts started, right? So martial arts has been around forever. What's crazy to me is it's completely unregulated. And there are people out there who can make the stupid argument, oh, well, the IBJJF regulates. No. The IBJJF doesn't regulate shit. You don't have to register for the IBJJF. You're not illegitimate if you don't register for them. Like, it means nothing in the grand scheme of martial arts, not just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So ultimately, we don't have a regulatory body. And do we really want one is the question we should be asking ourselves, because if we continue to ignore the countless amount of sexual abuse cases that are in the industry, especially pedophilia, eventually the government will step in. And if we don't regulate it ourselves, the government will over-regulate it, because that's typically how it always goes. So why not have our own accountability? Like, I think we should.
Such a good point. I don't know if I want to live in a world where the government is the governing body of like our martial arts community. Like, I can't.
It doesn't work out well, and they've tried.
No,
Like some people might have even heard of this. Like in New York, there's a thing called the diaphragm bill.
I've heard of this.
And the diaphragm bill, just to paraphrase here, basically just says that police officers are not allowed to put pressure on an assailant's diaphragm. So that means all of the safest ways to apprehend an assailant, mount, back mount, knee on belly, even side control, bear hug from the front, bear hug from the back. None of these are allowed by police officers, but you can still shoot someone, you can still tase them, you can still hit them with your car. All of these are completely fine, but don't sit on them. That's what happens when the government steps in and says, this is how we're going to do things now, because those dumbasses have never actually had to apprehend shit or
Yes.
or,
Yes.
they don't understand that what they just did was take people who are poorly trained, unfortunately. Now, luckily, there are more people training jiu-jitsu in the law enforcement community. There's a big push for that, which I love. But a lot of cops still do not continue their education when it comes to doing a job. They are going to go hands-on. So that blows my mind. That's just laziness 101. But it goes to show you what happens when the government steps in to regulate something that they have no business regulating.
Yeah, 100%. And I remember when that law came out, I don't remember the specific case that it came from. I think it was a result of kind of one of the more like well-known incidents that happened in New York. It might have been after Eric Garner, but it was insane. And I don't know if you remember the video. Have you ever seen the video that the NYPD put out? Like it was a training video that showed how they're supposed to control people.
Oh my God, I think I have taken shits that look better than that video. The video was ridiculous. That was an Aikido video. It's basically 100% Aikido. We're gonna risk like yeah, you might pull off a wrist lock, but good luck. Like we're not
Right.
talking like a tournament where it's like I have to get my grips on you. This is someone who, with the utmost hatred, is either trying to kill you or get away from you. They're not sitting there trying to engage with you because they don't want to go to jail. Like they're trying to get away. You're trying to apprehend them. I'm a little blown away when that happened, but it goes to show, what do we do as a community? Because it's all of our responsibilities, whether we like it or not. If we are instructors, business owners, coaches, we're in this community together, and it's our responsibility to decide where this goes next. And if we don't come together as a community and get rid of all that petty infighting crap that we love to do so much, and we don't unify karate, taekwondo, judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo, etc., if we don't unify as a community, not just jiu-jitsu, then eventually someone will see that it's fragmented, take advantage of that, and take advantage of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is like this idea or this want for different martial arts instructors or training companies or whatever that they want to own, like police training, for example, right? Like they want to be the only entity that you can train under, and this is our system, and every police department should train under this system. And that's how it's been set up for a long time. And it all comes down to money, obviously. And I talk about that a lot, where if obviously businesses want to make money, and they should, right? That a lot of us, that's how we pay our mortgage, and that's how we send our kids to college and all of that. And making money is great, but if you're teaching cops particular skills that have the potential to save their life or someone else's life, I don't think money needs to be or should not be the driving factor and the primary objective of whatever it is that you're training. And I feel like we've seen it over the years so many times in the law enforcement industry, where companies will come up with these systems and it's like 5 techniques, and they make it sound really cool and they make it look cool in their PowerPoint presentations that they pitch to admin and stuff, where it has absolutely no real world value. And at the end of the day, it all just comes down to, I know I can sell this as a product and make money. And I think it's just doing everybody a huge disservice. So yeah, I like what you said about kind of unifying, and not one person has to own it. There's so many good trainers out there, and there's so many good programs and things that can work for the street. I obviously am partial to jiu-jitsu, but I do think there are, there's benefits that you can get from other disciplines. I'm big into wrestling, Muay Thai, boxing. Sambo is a great one. Catch wrestling. If you can train some of this stuff, like, you're going to be so far ahead of where most of the guys you deal with on the street are going to be, for sure. Rob, that brings up a good question too. Like, what primary arts do you currently train in, or have you trained in? Let us know a little bit about that.
Yes, for sure. So I'm a 3rd-degree black belt in something called American Freestyle Karate, which was like no katas. So it was basically a glorified kickboxing. I'm a 3rd-degree black belt in something called Bullsh, which is a weapon system no one's heard. Purple belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, 6-0 amateur boxer, 4-2 amateur kickboxer. I was on an international kickboxing team for 2 years where we traveled and did sport karate tournaments and kickboxing. And I did that for like 2 years. I got sick of that. We were competing like every weekend. It was like local, national, international. And we did that every month, every week for like 2 years. And I got tired inside of hotels at cool places that I never got to actually enjoy.
Yeah.
And then ran a martial arts school for 4 years. Then after that, that got bought out. I became a striking coach at a Jiu Jitsu academy. So I was a program director, kids coach and striking coach there. And then McDojo like blew up. And so now pretty much it's my primary world for the last like 12 years has just been making sure that McDojo Life is still calling out people who do nefarious things. And hopefully if Academy Safe does its job, it will put McDojo Life mostly out of business, which I would love. I would absolutely love not to do a story about a coach molesting a kid every week. That'd be great to be out of business. So
yeah.
basically what I've been doing.
That's a good point. Yeah. And what sucks is unfortunately that shit's probably going to continue to happen, but it's nice to have guys like you that are like on a mission to call it out and call out these guys that are, you know, forming these cults around the world. Because essentially that's what it feels like they are, right? It's like some of your videos you post are fucking hilarious. I mean, they're all pretty funny, you know, like with these bullshit martial arts and stuff. But there's a few where I find myself like literally laughing out loud by myself because it's so ridiculous. The no touch kung fu guy that's sitting on the couch.
Oh, yeah.
He's like the bawling dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. 1 gram of pressure.
Yeah. What's crazy is like he runs a cult called Heaven Man Earth. And one of the biggest signs of someone being a cult leader is talking about not being a cult leader. Not like a conversation people who aren't running cults have to say. If you're not a cult leader, you just don't say anything about it at all and you continue to do your job, right? But like he has like a podcast that he did with another guy who believes that same garbage. And they just talk for like an hour about how they're not cult leaders. It's kind of a red flag, brother. Like, you know, I'm pretty sure David Koresh had the same conversation, you know, like he was like, hey, I'm not a cult leader. Let me have sex with your wife. Like, oh, like so weird. And like drop in the bucket. I don't know. I think I've done maybe over 300 stories now on different martial arts cults. Some vary. Some are like a little bit more mild, but some are absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Like one dude is actually even like a hard right public speaker now. And he runs like these kids camps on how to turn their boys into men. And like this dude worked for the DEA. He molested 2 women under his own like religious practice that he called sexual healing. Literally had one of his students and he was like, his student was married and he was like, I want to marry your wife. And the guy's like, okay. And he winds up marrying the guy's wife, turns around and hires the guy to work for him in his church as a pastor. It's so odd, all these stories. And again, some are hilarious and some are terrifying.
Yeah. What do you think it is like, because you've done a lot of these stories, what do you think it is that attracts these people to these like bullshit martial arts leaders or cult leaders, I guess we could call them, because they have a following, right? They have people that pay them money or worse, let them, you know, sleep with their wives, like you said.
I think it's the same thing that draws anybody to anything. I don't think it's special anymore. I've seen so many of them. There's so many parallels to just a martial arts school. Like I'll give you an example of like my first true like bulb click when it came to this. I was a martial arts instructor the majority of my life, and I still teach seminars here and there and stuff, but like full time, I'm really more of an investigative journalist because of what I do.
Yeah.
Teaching. I was teaching at after school programs. I wound up teaching for the diocese, so the Catholic Church. And if you ever teach for the diocese, they actually have a lot of things that you have to go through in order to teach for them. It's not just like, oh, I'm teaching, right? So I had my background checks done, local, federal, and I had to go through a thing called Protecting God's Children. And it's a course very similar to like Safe Sport, but just for the diocese about what is and what is not appropriate when dealing and teaching with children, which is very ironic considering it's the Catholic Church, but neither here nor there. So I wind up going through this class, right? And as I'm listening to like an explanation on the course, it starts talking about what makes someone more likely to be a child molester. And the things that they were naming were literally everything that would make someone a good instructor. And that was insane to me to hear this. So they were like, cares a little too much, like spends a little extra time, like make sure that they're really getting the lesson. Like I'm listening to like this list of things that was going off, and I'm like, these are almost identical to just being a good teacher. So it's like, how could you be a good teacher without being accused of being a child molester at this point, right? Because like they look so similar. And so that always stuck with me. There's not a lot of differences between a cult and like religion or martial arts. And hear me out for a second, right? So with religion and martial arts, they parallel very similarly. So when I go into a religion, there are already rules written for me. We'll say the Catholic Church, right? We already have the 10 Commandments. These are rules that I have to live by. I cannot do this, or this, right? Or I am not this thing. Well, when you go into a martial arts studio, there are almost rules for every dojo that you go to. The first one being, don't wear shoes on the mat. It's pretty standard, right? Why? For people's safety, for things being sanitary. There's a million and one reasons. You don't want to have dog poo on your mat or ruin a $250 mat, but there's a reason for that rule. But there's also a built-in hierarchy. So like when I walk in, I know who the coach is. That's very known. And usually in martial arts, it's through a colored belt system or even where we stand. Like if you've been here longer, you get a little closer to the front of the line, or if you've been here not, you maybe you're closer to the end of the line, right? So you're working your way up and you already know your place when you're here. You already know you don't know something, right? Like if I just joined a religious group, I don't know anything about these scriptures or whatever is being talked about. I know that the person in charge does, but that's why I'm here. I'm entrusting that they know more than I do about this subject. Well, martial arts is very similar. They know how to fight. I don't. So let's learn how to do that. But now I've added another dynamic. They can beat me up. They know how to beat me up efficiently. So there's a little bit of that that's always in the air. And depending on what gym you go to, that sometimes is used against you. Like some gyms, they'll just beat the shit out of you because you did or said something you weren't supposed to. And rather than acting like an actual business and saying, hey, let's talk for a second. You said this about so and so. You probably shouldn't do that. This is a place of business. Don't do that. Some gyms will just beat you up. Right. And so that air always is there. But how about just bowing? When I walk into some martial arts studios, I have to bow at the door. When I walk into other martial arts studios, I bow at the mat. And some martial arts studios don't require bowing at all. Well, if I go to like a Catholic mass, sometimes there's a bowl of holy water there, and I might, for lack of better words, anoint myself before I walk forward to go to the pews. Sometimes I don't do that. I just take a knee at the pew before I sit down. And then, for lack of better words, anoint myself before I sit at the pew. And sometimes I just don't because it's not required. I don't have to do that at all if I don't want to. Well, how about in martial arts? There's a point in martial arts classes where everybody walks around and they shake each other's hands. I shake, hey, good class, good job. Well, in Catholic Mass, there's a point in Catholic Mass where everybody stands up and you shake the hands of complete strangers around you. Peace be with you and unto you, and you shake each other's hands, right? That's very similar. And Catholic Mass, there might be a picture or statue or photo, stained glass, of Jesus Christ behind the person who's preaching. Well, in martial arts, there's usually a picture on the wall of the person who came before them or the instructor or master who came before them. And what do? Before we start most classes in martial arts, we might bow to that photo and give that representation that as a thank you. We appreciate the fact that you were here, right? So it's like a slight worship. Like it's a thank you, but it's slight. And then we have one person teaching martial arts to an entire group. They're giving a lesson that we're all soaking in, and it's for our benefit. And then in religion, they're giving us a lesson we're all soaking in for our benefit. So they're very similar. But when it starts to become a cult, in my opinion, and I hate when I say it, I always give the same spiel, right? But there's always some douchebag in the comment section that makes that work is like a cult. No, it's not. Like ultimately, the difference between martial arts religion and a cult, in my opinion, is who benefits. So, like, if I'm in a martial arts class and I'm teaching martial arts, my goal should be to benefit my student. They're paying to learn something while I'm here. My goal is to make them better at something. If I am a preacher, my goal is to give information on religion. Hopefully, in that point, if I believe in that religion thing, that I save them and I make them better people for it. But it's for them, not for me. I'm sacrificing to do this job. And anybody who's ever taught martial arts full time knows you're sacrificing a lot. Your body, you're most likely not getting paid bank, and you're doing it because you love it, right? The moment it becomes a cult is when it benefits the person in charge more than it benefits the followers. So like the students, if all of a sudden I'm giving out all this money and I have to call you master outside of this, and you're controlling my life outside of this, and you're telling me what I can and cannot do or can and cannot say. Now this is a cult. This is a service. I'm paying you money. You teach me martial arts for this amount of time, and then I fuck off. When we're in here, I'll call you professor. When we're out there, your name is just Steve. Like, I don't have to call you shit. Like, I'm paying you money for a service. And like, you don't get to dictate what I can and cannot do outside of this program. Because again, that's not your job. Your job is to teach me martial arts that I paid you for. After that, you get the finger and I get to do what I want because I'm a grown man, right? But a lot of people don't see it that way. And that's when it becomes a cult. Like, oh, master so-and-so. If you want to call them that, that's cool. But the moment they demand it 24 hours a day, yeah, you're probably in a cult. Just my opinion.
That's such a good point and very well articulated. I guess I never really thought about the dynamics or like the what's the word I'm looking for? The similarities between religion and martial arts, right? But the way that you described it, I think it absolutely like makes sense, because going back to that point about gyms, you know, like come in and just getting your ass kicked so they can kind of like prove that they're like, you know, better than you, or they have some sort of dominance over you. That unfortunately, that shit does happen. You know, there's jiu-jitsu gyms all over the country like that. I feel like, where you come in and it's not a welcoming environment. They just Shark Tank you right away. They want to prove themselves to you. And it's like, if you're there to try a class, maybe you thought about signing up. Well, what kind of business are you running, and how long are you going to be in business if everybody that comes in you just treat like shit and you know kick their ass and do whatever? I think that's so insane to me. But
And jiu-jitsu usually is the one that, like, a lot of people who are in jiu-jitsu want to make jiu-jitsu bulletproof, right? They're like, jiu-jitsu is the end all be all. Like, this is, you know, what we do. You know, ultimately, jiu-jitsu is the best art, right? Well, that's a fantasy. Like, jiu-jitsu is not free from the bullshit either.
right,
Even jiu-jitsu has weird rituals that certain schools do. Not all schools do, but some schools do, like the gauntlet, where they whip you with belts, right? Let's take that same thing. If you don't think that's culty shit, look up the word flagellation and look at how many cults participate in flagellation. Not just self-flagellation either, right? So all of these cults do it, but jiu-jitsu is not a cult that does it. Like, well, yes, you do. If you're clearly saying it's okay for you to whip me for no benefit of my own, like, it doesn't help you. Like, you have to ask yourself, does this make me better at jiu-jitsu if I do it? The answer is no. Doesn't make you better at jiu-jitsu if you do it. Does it make me worse at jiu-jitsu if I don't do it? Well, the answer is no. And people are like, well, it's a rite of passage. No, jiu-jitsu itself is the rite of passage. You going and sparring every day is the rite of passage. You getting benefit from this and working hard, that's your rite of passage. You getting whipped is some bullshit that one of the original Dirty Dozen did. And even him, even the guy who started doing the gauntlet, the very first guy, he is quoted as saying it's hazing. Like, he knows it's hazing, and he even said that it's gotten out of hand. The guy who started it, and it's like blows my mind. I even saw jiu-jitsu gyms paddling and like students, like literally, like
oh my God.
hit them on the butt. It's like, why do you do this? Because someone ahead of you said that it was okay, and they don't want to look dumb, so they will never say that it's not okay because they themselves did it. That's it. There's no real reason to do it. It doesn't make you better.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. We actually, the gym I started training at back in the day, I started training jiu-jitsu in 2011. We did the gauntlet, and then probably for about a year. And then shortly thereafter, I think my head coach, my instructor was like, yeah, this is borderline hazing. It's not for everybody. He wanted to grow his gym and memberships. And I think obviously that's a huge turnoff for most people. But it's funny, that also ties into like police training, because it's sort of like, this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way that we're always going to do it. We see that all the time in our industry, where that's why training has sucked for so long, because they bought into these like bullshit methodologies and systems way back in the 60s and 70s, and it just kind of, you know, carried through into today. Now it's obviously changing a little bit, but yeah, man, I haven't heard of the paddles. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's weird, man. And like when you hear the gym owners and they try to justify it, they have really no justification other than rite of passage. And they'll say the excuses like, well, this isn't for everybody. Like, if you don't like it, you don't have to train here. That's the dumbest fucking excuse for any goddamn thing I have ever heard in my life. All right, I'm gonna hit all my students with my car, and if you don't like it, you can just train somewhere else. Like, well, motherfucker, like they will train somewhere else if they're sane and not brainwashed morons who go, please just take that ritual and apply it to your workspace. Like, all right, guys, we're sitting here. It's me. We got the president, the CEO, the head of R&D, right? And everybody's real quick. We just want to give a hand to Phil, the head of accounting. He just got a promotion. And then everyone takes off their belts for some reason. And they go, all right, come here, Phil. And then they just whip the shit out of him. That would be a PR nightmare. No one would stay at that job. No one's sane, right? But in jiu-jitsu, they justify it and go, oh, it's okay. It's a tradition. It's a rite of passage. For who? The only people it's a rite of passage for are the people who are brainwashed enough to agree to do it. And then after they do it, they go, well, shit, I already did it. And I don't want to feel stupid or look dumb. So now I have to like perpetuate this because I did it. And it wasn't so bad, right? Like, okay, like keep trying that mental gymnastics. See how that works out for you.
Oh, dude, 100%. And the thing with jiu-jitsu class, like when you're doing it, you're paying to be there. So you're paying someone $200 a month or however much your membership fee is to pays you.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? I've heard this with other things too. So like overseas, you see this a lot more in the Middle East than you do anywhere else. But for some reason, it's very prevalent in the Middle East where they'll have students stand there, put their hands behind their back, and the coach will just tee off on their head, right? And everyone here in the United States will look at that. And some of the same people who go through the gauntlet will go, well, that's just dumb. And then the people who get their head teed off on will look at the gauntlet and go, that's just dumb. Like, you'd be amazed about how many people do stupid shit and call other stupid shit stupid, but not their stupid shit. Like, this is my dumb, you know?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's I've seen some of those videos that you posted where, and you mentioned that you were a boxer. I think you said you were like you had 6 fights.
Yeah, 6-0. Yeah.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so I boxed for a minute back in like 2013 through about 2020. I had three or four fights, and then I did some coaching after that. I just really liked boxing. I kind of fell in love with it. And yeah, I watched some of those videos that you posted where they're like teeing off on people's faces to like toughen them up or whatever the fuck they were trying to do. I don't understand it. Basically just giving them CTE at classes. Like I couldn't imagine paying to have someone do that for me. Not in sparring. Obviously, when you spar or you get in the ring and you compete, you're going to get punched in the face. But doing it in training like that, where you just have your arms down at your sides while your quote unquote coach comes around and just beats the shit out of you for no reason, it's insane.
Yeah, like I had one guy, I did a story about him. I called it Coach Zero, but his name was like those letters mixed around, Orez or something like that. But he was a coach in the Middle East, and he kind of went viral there for a while because he would have his students line up and he'd tee off on their head, right? And then he had this very strange, like, I don't know what you would call it, like it was like a BS resume. Like he was like, I have over 300 fights and like these many professional fights. And I'm like, well, you had all these professional fights. I was like, amateur fights, I understand if I don't find them online. But professional fights, the whole goal of a professional fight is they have to make money in order to pay you. And they're using you to make money. And one of the best ways to do that for the last like 50 years or so has been recording that and putting it out and selling it. And you're telling me you have all these pro fights. So I challenged him. I was like, all right, well, if you believe like you can do these things and you think that training and methodology is really a good thing for your students or not, do that to me. I'm not the greatest. I'm mediocre at best, if that, right? So if you have all these pro fights, you should mow through me. And of course, he never does because he's full of shit. But ultimately, like a lot of these down the same line that we're talking about here with abusive behavior, they market it and they sell it in a way that students are easily brainwashed into going along with it because they don't know any better. The average student, when they first walk into a martial arts studio, doesn't know to ask any question other than how much does it cost. They know nothing about the culture. They know nothing about the politics, which is also something I hate in the martial arts industry. They know nothing about the atmosphere and what they're going to learn. All they know is, well, how much does it cost? And then they base their decision off of that answer. And then, of course, how they feel on their first day. what most students don't know is you're going to be treated better on your first day than you do any other day in your gym. And so you're not getting the truth. If you're a new student out there and you want to know what it's going to be like for you, when you go in for your first class at any gym, right? Understand they're kissing your ass. That first day, they're going to give you love bombs and all that crap because that's just how it is, right? Look at how
100%.
you treat everyone else because that's you after you sign paperwork. And if they're not happy, you're not going to be happy. If you walk into a gym that's been open for 5 years and there's like 3 students on the mat, there's a reason. There's a reason there's only 3 people here. Like, ask these questions, not just how much does it cost.
That's such a good point. Yeah, you know, and I think that is like the biggest factor because it can be expensive to train, but I'm also a big believer in like you get what you pay for. And if there's a gym that maybe costs a significant, and this isn't always true, but like if there's a gym that costs a significant amount more than maybe some of the other gyms that you researched and wanted to train at, you know, you're probably going to get what you pay for. Like the gym I train at, I train under Sean Williams at Enzo Gracie, Nashville. So shout out to those guys. Sean Williams, I don't know if you know who he is or familiar with him, but renowned as kind of probably one of the best coaches in the country. He commentates a lot of fights. He's been in the game for a long time. He was one of, what was I going to say? Sometimes I lose my train of thought, Rob, because I'm old and I think I'm starting early onset dementia.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, I got a lot of CP. I have no clue what I'm doing right now. I have no clue where I am.
Yeah. And probably from boxing, getting punched in the head over the years so many times.
Yeah, it ruined my modeling career, you know?
Yeah. But, you know, Sean, to train under Sean at his gym is more expensive than probably some of the other gyms. But I'm willing to invest in that because I get so much more back from it, right? Like if you want to be really good at something, sometimes you got to seek out the coaches and invest in yourself. But I think you're right. A lot of times when people are looking for a martial arts school, jiu-jitsu gym, whatever it might be, how much does it cost? And they might be like sticker shocked without asking more questions and diving into like what's the culture of that gym like? How are the people that train there? How skilled and talented are they? Because your training partners also make you better. I think that's something that's oftentimes overlooked. But I just, it's interesting that you say that because I think that happens a lot, and that shouldn't be the only deciding factor when you're trying to make a. So if there's anyone listening to this podcast right now that's not a part of a gym and you want to maybe dabble in jiu-jitsu, you want to try a class, like I would say try a few different gyms too, because the culture aspect of it, as you know, that's a big thing too, because you might not be a good fit at every gym. There might be a gym that's maybe a little bit more hardcore, and they're big on competing, and that's all they do. And maybe you want to compete, and you might be a better fit there than a gym that just sort of like a lot of hobbyists that just want to go and get a workout, and that's the reasons why they do it.
Yeah, like, you know, some of the questions that'll be more beneficial to ask other than, you know, obviously you need to know price because you know what you can and cannot afford, right? That's a no-brainer. That's why it's the easiest question for most people to ask. But do they have background checks here? Because you could have a world-renowned coach who rapes people, like, or is cool with that. Like, it's crazy. Like, you know, not to name too many names, but let's do it. Like, let's talk about, like, when you think about it, think about some of the best gyms on the planet and how gross some of the behavior has been over the years. Think about what happened with fight sports. Anybody in the industry knows what that is. And if you don't, just simply look it up. That story made it all the way to the New York Times. That's how big that story was. What happened there? We're going to give a rapist $50,000 severance pay? Yeah, that makes sense, right? No, it doesn't. That's crazy person behavior. And they did it anyway. And then there were so many people who turned a blind eye to what happened. Or how about what happened with Lloyd Irvin? Did we forget about that all of a sudden? Did we forget about those rapes? Or are we just going to pretend that didn't happen because he's good at jiu-jitsu? Like, there's so many people who turned a blind eye to ridiculous behavior because someone's good at martial arts. How about a more important question? Are you having fun? No one thinks about that. It's almost never a conversation that comes up when people talk about good martial arts. You're more likely to train. You're more likely to practice. You're more likely to show up more often if you enjoy it. And you will get better because of that. Or is it safe for you to train there? If I train at a hardcore gym and I get my arm broken in the gym, I'm not more effective at martial arts. I'm less effective. I don't get to pick and choose when I get mugged or when I have to defend myself. So I hardcore train and I'm injured every week, arm in a sling, and then I have to defend myself with an arm in a sling. Did my money go to make me better or worse? It just made me worse, no matter how hardcore the gym is. Or you have a fight coming up and I'm getting ready for my fight camp and they don't understand how to train you for a fight camp and you get injured. Well, if you're doing this professionally, you don't get paid anymore. If you're doing this amateur, you probably will never make it to being a pro. So like ultimately your training and your safety, your health, and if you're having fun are more important than most anything else. And people usually overlook that because they'll look at somebody and go, that's hardcore. Yeah. Good luck with that when you're in your face. Like good luck with that when your ankle or your knee is shattered.
Mats where like there's so many people packed into a mat, open mat, for example, and no one's paying any attention and people are getting kicked in the fucking head and, you know, spraining whatever, elbows, ankles, all that kind of stuff. I've had it happen to me. I've been kicked in the head multiple times during situations like that. Safety is a big thing in longevity. Like you said, if you want to do this into your 40s, 50s, 60s, I think it's really important to take care of your body and not have to go 1,000% all the time, which is one thing I like about jiu-jitsu when you are in the right gym and you have the right training partners. And this is a side note for people listening. Like if you're just starting out training and maybe you're 45 years old, you don't have to go train with the 25-year-old autistic kid that's on steroids, right? Like you can pick and choose your training partners. You can go there just because it's fun. And I think in law enforcement, for sure, there's this idea that training always has to be like life and death. And the things that I'm learning have to like, you know, are going to save my ass in a street fight. And that's great. You get the self-defense aspect of it, but also you're allowed to have fun. It can be an outlet for stress relief and just to, you know, to bullshit with your friends on the mat. That's why I call this podcast On the Wall. Because as you know, after jiu-jitsu, like one of my favorite parts about jiu-jitsu training is like after we get done beating the shit out of each other, just sitting along the wall and talking about life, talking about whatever topics come up, you know, religion, politics, whatever. And like everybody's there to kind of get better at jiu-jitsu and doesn't really care about much else. I feel like that's a big part of jiu-jitsu training and a big benefit that I get out of it. I don't know how you feel that way, but
yeah, I love that part. Like that's actually how I started McDojo life, was one of those conversations. Like there was a guy who had come into a class and it was his first official class. He had already done his trial class. Now he's signed up. He's got his gis ready to go. And I was the admin at the time. So I'm just doing paperwork and my boss calls me and he's like, hey man, I'm not going to be able to make it into class today. Would you do me a favor and would you help assist the class? Would you like help me out and teach for me? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. The dude never calls in sick, so it's not a problem. So I like go and I teach the class. We work like arm bar from guard and triangle and then the transition between the two, right? Then afterwards, we're all just shooting the shit. And the subject of McDojos came up. And so we talked about McDojos, which has been a term that's been around longer than I've been born. And everyone left except for that guy. And that guy stayed behind and he was like, hey man, I'm a little embarrassed. Could you like maybe tell me what a McDojo is? I don't know what that means. And so I explained to him at the time my best version of what I believed it was, which has changed drastically after this job. And he was like, well, why doesn't anybody do anything about that? And I was like, that is a good question. So I just started researching. I was like, well, what are the regulatory bodies in martial arts? Oh, there are none. Well, like you figured maybe there should be at least one? Not one. What are the requirements to start a martial arts school? Nothing. Do you even need to know martial arts? Like, no. What do these certificates mean? Most of them mean nothing. Like none of them mean anything except for what we believe them to mean. And so like if a guy off the street walked in and saw like a Henzo Gracie black belt certificate, to us, that's a big deal. Like, you know, that's a legit credential from someone who knows what they're talking about. To the guy off the street, it means nothing. He sees medals and trophies on the wall. What does that mean? He doesn't know. He has no clue what that means. They're like, that's cool, I guess. I don't know what that means. So like, but for us, I think we get blinded by just being in it. And so it makes it much harder to take a view back. But that student, he hadn't been in it. So he had this like bird's eye view of what martial arts was. And so he's coming in asking questions, not just accept. And I was like, damn, that is such a good question. So after that, I just started McDojo life because it seemed like there were so many people arguing over petty things that mean so much to people, but really mean nothing. Like, how long does it take to get a black belt? Well, people will make fun of a Taekwondo black belt who got his black belt in 3 years, but praise someone like BJ Penn who got his BJJ black belt in 3 years. Like, so are we saying that it's because the art you do is different than the art I do? I don't give it credibility? Like, okay, well, that's weird because that means it's an opinion. It's not a fact. Well, what are the fact-based things that we can look at to make our industry better? The only way to fix any problem, it first has to be defined. Like, I have to know what the problem is in order to solve it. So after some research, I found like a lot of real major issues that were being ignored because people were too busy arguing over petty issues like skill. Like, oh, well, he's not very good, so he's not a real black belt. Like, okay, well, let's say the pinnacle of skill in jiu-jitsu right now, we can say what, Marcelo Garcia, we might say Gordon Ryan, right? So Gordon Ryan currently. So like, let's say you can't beat Gordon Ryan. Does that mean no one deserves a black belt unless you could beat Gordon Ryan because he's the pinnacle? Well, no, that's not what that means. Like, because it's not just skill based. Because if it was, no one would have a damn black belt except for the one guy who could beat everyone, right? So like, it's
100%.
there's so many opinion based things. But what about, like, I don't know, this guy's a black belt, legit martial artist, undefeated record, raped 5 kids. What's the most important part there? I would think the raping of the 5 kids is the most important part. Maybe we should look at that as if that is the worst thing, not this guy's going to beat people up so we can ignore that. Yeah, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I don't know.
No, it's that you touched on a really good point too with like the whole black belt thing and the skills. There is this idea that like what is a real black belt, and it's so subjective. You know, there's a lot of people that have dedicated so much time on the mats over the years and blood, sweat, and tears. And I think those folks, yeah, like you're not going to beat Gordon Ryan, right? I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. I'm never going to defeat Gordon Ryan or Marcelo Garcia or any of those guys. And as a matter of fact, I get my ass kicked on a regular basis in our competition class every morning by 25-year-old purple belts that do nothing but compete and train jiu-jitsu twice a day, you know, and are younger, stronger, faster, maybe a little bit more technical. They can move in ways that my body just doesn't allow me to do it. Does that mean I'm not a black belt because, you know, they tap me out in comp class? Maybe, but I don't care necessarily. And I think if a lot of folks, especially have been training a long time, as you age, your body's not going to allow you to do shit that it let you do when you were 25 years old. And so you have to understand that. And I think when people do get into martial arts, sometimes like you brought up a point or a question earlier, like how long does it take me to get my black belt? And I think a lot of times that becomes the focus, whereas it's not so much about just the physical and mental health benefits that you get from training or the skills that you build from a self-defense aspect. It's like becomes belt is like the most important thing. And I just think that if that's how you're approaching it, you're going to be really disappointed because in my experience, belts don't really mean shit other than you've dedicated a lot of your life to a specific thing. And I'm a big believer in that. Some people might argue with me, the jiu-jitsu purists that maybe think like you're not a real black belt unless you compete, or you're not a real this belt unless you can beat so-and-so, you know?
Yeah, which is interesting because so many people look up to John Donna here, like one of the greatest jiu-jitsu coaches, if not the greatest jiu-jitsu coach of all time, right? Like a fantastic coach. He produces athletes at the top level who win. So we can argue, if we look at down the history, probably one of the greatest coaches in jiu-jitsu of all time. How many competitions did he compete in and how often did he win? Like, oh yeah, like, can you name any? Like,
Exactly.
exactly, because it's not all about that. Like, of course, people will go, "Well, that's the exception to the rule." No, no, no. If there is an exception, there is no rule. It's an opinion. It's a guideline for you personally. It's not a rule. Like, here's a rule: if I murder somebody and get caught, I'm probably going to get arrested for it. Right? Probably a pretty good standard rule of life. That's probably going to happen. Now, whether or not I get convicted, whether or not I go to jail, well, that's up to lawyers and courtrooms, right? That's up to the jury. That's up to a lot of factors, right? But ultimately, we understand that if I do this, this happens, right? Well, with martial arts, look at somebody like Freddie Roach, right? Freddie Roach, fantastic boxing instructor, right? Parkinson's disease. Could that dude box right now? Probably not. Can that dude hold mitts and stop shaking? Yes, it goes to show you the power of what really happens when your mind and your body are connected and you're able to do something you love. But ultimately, not everyone who's a good coach is somebody who's a good athlete. Not everybody who's a good athlete is a good coach. And that's okay. We have to stop confining everybody into these little boxes and say, well, if you didn't do this, you can't do this. Well, just because you can't do this doesn't mean someone else can. And this fantasy that people have in their 20s, which I guess a lot of us do because we have we're only looking through our eyes out into the world. We have this fantasy that we're not going to become 40 and 50. Like, what is that like? You don't know until you're there. Like, you don't. You have no clue what it's like to be 40 and 50 because you're not. You're 20 years old, full of testosterone, and you're just going out there balls to the wall. And you don't think about what happens later on down the road. But eventually you realize Pai Mei is not real. There is no man on the mountaintop who's 90 years old that can beat people up. Like, that dude is just happy he got out of bed, and the minimal pain that exists in his body, he's happy with because it's not as bad as the pain as yesterday. Like, that's reality. Like, like the vitamins that you will have to take later on are a reality. The doctor's appointments and the amount of times you will pee later on will change than the amount of times that you go now. Your body will
Oh my God.
It's okay.
Yeah, that's so true.
But we got
That's so true.
pretending that that's not going to happen to us. Like, and if that's the case, and we're always saying that skill is the basis for your black belt, then that means once we reach a certain age, we should all give up our black belts. They don't exist anymore because guess what? You're going to deteriorate. You're not going to be as good as you were. And even crazier, martial arts evolves. So like you as a 20-year-old go back in time, right? And you face a 20-year-old then. You destroy most of them. Not because you're fantastic, but because the art has evolved. What you know about that art has been now evolved by other people who learned, studied, trained, competed, and give you better advice than what we had 20 years ago. That's the beauty of martial arts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, to your point about like coaches versus or coaching versus skill, I always say like teaching is an art in and of itself. And like not everybody can be a good teacher or a good coach. So just because you have a black belt in a particular discipline or some type of certification, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good instructor or a good coach. I see that all the time. I mean, there's a ton of jiu-jitsu black belts out there who would probably just murder most people on the mats, but just they couldn't tell you how to do a basic armbar because that's not their specialty. Maybe they're not good communicators. They don't know how to break things down. They don't know how to keep students engaged, right? So like your point about the boxing coach is one of the things that an example I use is Mike Tyson's, former trainer, Customato, right? Like could Customato beat Mike Tyson in a boxing match, right? Like absolutely. Mike Tyson would murder that guy in a ring, but he was a great coach and he knew how to train Mike Tyson to be one of the greatest boxers of all time, right? And it just, as you age, your body's not going to let you do stuff. And I think you're right. When you're in your 20s, you're sort of like, you think you're never going to die and you're invincible and like you're just going to be on top of the world forever. And for our younger audience that's listening right now, Rob and I are both here to tell you that you do pee a lot more. Things don't work like they used to, and it's important to adapt. And going back to what I said earlier, pick and choose your training partners if you're on the mats because longevity is a big piece of it. I have a couple partners that I trained jiu-jitsu with back in Minneapolis, Pat and George. They're like, they're both in their 70s. They're both black belts. They train 5 days a week and they're some of my favorite people and they're like so inspirational. But those guys will tell you, like I talked to Pat Worley one day. He's a big karate guy. I don't know if you know Pat Worley. 10th degree karate black belt, been around forever, been on the cover of Black Belt magazine. He's buddies with like Chuck Norris and shit. He's one of the like most interesting dudes that I've ever met. Sure. But he's also one of the most like inspirational guys. And I always really like talking with him and training with him because he would tell me, like he's 75 years old, 76 years old. He's like, the only time I'm not in like pain is when I'm on the mats training jiu-jitsu. He's like, the rest of the day, everything just hurts, and he's like a 2nd or 3rd degree black belt. Is he going to beat the 25-year-old competitive purple belt? No, he's not. But that's not why he's doing it. He's doing it to stay in shape and for a lot of the reasons why we do it. Going back to having fun, getting some of the other benefits out of it. So I do think people need to realize like belt rank is one part of your training, but it should not be the only focus. And it shouldn't be something that we think like once you reach a certain level, well, now you've accomplished something. Because like they say in jiu-jitsu, when you get your black belt, you almost feel like you start over again and you start learning jiu-jitsu. And I never really understood that until I got my black belt. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now because there's nowhere else to go from there. I could just start fucking around and learning fun stuff that I never really thought of before because I was so worried about getting to the next belt level. And now there is no more belt level. So it's just really about learning and having fun and enjoying the process.
Yeah, man. I guess sometimes we can look back over, like, I don't know, I've been training. April 12th marks 28 years in the industry. My birthday at 12 years old was my very first class. And I think sometimes over the course of those years, you have to make decisions. And the biggest decision is, do I continue to train or not? And it's an easy decision that you have to make every day. Every day has to you make that decision. Do I want to do this or not? And then you go, yeah, I think I do. Like, but why? Like, we overlook the why so much. And I think over the years, you have to change your why. There's nothing wrong with changing your why. It's like changing your mind. You can love this food when you're 20, and then you get 30, your taste buds change and you just don't want to eat that shit anymore. And then if you don't like change the way that you approach life, you're stuck eating some shit you don't want to eat. Like, there you are, your family's like, we know you love this. And you could either sit there and just go, yes, I still do. It tastes delicious. And that's a lie. Like, you have to be honest with yourself. Like, if you want to do this, you have to keep asking yourself why. And if it changes, change how you approach it. It's okay to like say, you know what, right now I like competing. And then one day you just might not. And other people might give you a hard time for that. Well, they could suck your balls because it's your life and you only get one of them. And you get to make your own decisions as a big boy or a big girl in this world. You don't have to listen to anybody else's why but your own. And you were talking about like skill. It reminded me of a story when I was coaching, helping with jujitsu. So I was a blue belt at the time. So I was like assisting with classes and helping with the white belts, the younger guys and people who were just learning. And we had a guy come in and he had cerebral palsy. And so he had like arm crutches. So he had to have them everywhere he walked. And it affected, like, I guess his right arm, but it really affected his legs badly. So without those crutches, he had a really hard time getting anywhere. Even with the crutches, he had a hard time. He would show up every day, and every day we would line up on the mat and we would all bow into class. So like, he had the crutches off to the side and he would put them off to the side before class starts, and he would stand on his own and he would do his very best to bow into class. And he did this for like months, and he fell every time we bowed into class. He like fell. And so finally one day I walked over to him and I was like, hey man, you don't have to like stand and bow when we stand and bow. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, if you can't do it, I'd rather you just not get injured. And he goes, no, because the only reason I'm doing this is because when I get to my blue belt, I want to walk up, get my blue belt and walk back to line. That was it. That was his only motivation. He didn't give a shit about competition. He didn't care about like being the best at jiu-jitsu. He was well aware of what his body could and could not do. And this was something that actually helped him tremendously build strength and muscle groups that he had not used before or used in a while. Things stopped atrophying as bad. So like, he was using this as a tool. And I'll be damned, when he got his blue belt, he walked up, got his belt, walked back, and he fell when he walked back. And I cried. I was really touched by that. I was like, that is the most touching thing I'd ever seen. Because all of that other petty bullshit that everybody complains about, oh, you're not very good, all that crap, that bravado, that ego, none of that matters to somebody who's doing it because of their why. They don't care about your reason for doing shit. And I think that could be overlooked so easily in a group environment where so many people are telling you why to do what you're doing. Look, if you want to do this because you want to be a hardcore competitor, do it. If you want to do this because you want to lose weight, do it. Just don't do it because of somebody else's reason for doing it. Do it because it's going to better you. It's just a little advice for anybody who's out there.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. It brings up another question for you. Like, what is your why? Like, why do you continue to train as you get older and stuff? Do you have some specific reasons?
Yeah. Now my why is all about trying to change the landscape of this industry. Like, I have two fears. Like, they are very specific and I'm never shy about saying them. Terrified of heights. It's unreasonable. I don't know why. When I was younger, didn't give a shit, love roller coasters, but somewhere around my 20s, I get on a roller coaster, I fucking fall apart. It's irrational fear, but I do, right?
I'm with you. I don't judge.
Yeah. The other one is I'm terrified that I'm going to die and I would have made no impact on the world. Like, eternity is a very long time when you think about it. And I'm not religious. Like, I'm agnostic. I don't have a fucking clue what happens when we die. I don't pretend that I know, and I'm always asking questions to try to figure it out. But in my opinion, I think when we go, that's it. And I think the only way that you can have some type of life after death is what you do while you live. And I'm terrified that I will not get that, because the only people who get remembered after their death are people who actually did something and made an impact. Why do I know George Washington exists? Abe Lincoln, Martin Luther King? Why do I know they exist? Well, they were granted immortality through their memory. They will never actually die because they were impactful enough to not die, metaphorically anyway. So, like, I'm terrified that I'm just going to poof and nothing happens and no one remembers that I existed and I'm just gone. That terrifies me. That is true nothingness. So that means that I have a limited amount of time on this planet to do anything. And I know martial arts, I know this industry, and I feel like it could be improved. It could save lives, it could help people, but it needs work. And I can't sit by and been in this industry for as long as I have and watch case after case after case of child molestation, watch martial arts instructors pay severance pays to rapists, watch murders happen, all in our industry, all in the name of the sensei or the master. That's ridiculous. But the only way that that's going to change is if we actually try to change it. And we have to be crazy enough to make that attempt, or it's never going to change. And so I want to be able to make an impact on this industry for the better and to help people. That's my why. And I think that over the last, I probably didn't realize it when I started McDojo life for like the first 5 years. But I think I was building to that. And I think over this last 6 years of McDojo life has really been dedicated to just that is it. Like, there are people out there who have been taken advantage of by their instructor, but they're terrified to say anything because their instructor is a police officer, or they're in a position of authority over them in some capacity, or they're very efficient at being violent. Well, after dipping my toe into that water a few times and standing up for those people, I realized they're not shit. They're pieces of garbage who manipulate people with their position of authority, and they scare people into being quiet about the evil shit that they do. Well, guess what? I don't mind being that guy. I actually enjoy being that guy who goes after these people. So I think at least now that's my current why. And maybe it changes, but I love the fact that that's my why now, because it's a very solid why. And I don't think I've ever felt that strongly about just about anything in my life.
No, that's awesome, man. And that's kick ass. And you're obviously doing a great job at it. And I think having a why like that you're really passionate about keeps you interested and keeps you involved, and it keeps you going. I think that's also, like you said, vanishing from the planet and not leaving anything behind. I've thought about that before too. It's like, what's your purpose here? What are we doing? Why am I doing the things that I do every day? So I love that, dude. I think that's a great story. It's a great purpose. It's kind of why I started Jiu Jitsu Five-O. It was not to make money. It was not to try to be some internet celebrity. It was really like, I found Jiu Jitsu to really benefit my life as a cop. It gave me an outlet for stress relief. It provided mental and physical health benefits, which a lot of cops obviously need. And I'm like, how could I appeal or promote Jiu Jitsu to the masses and just promote it and get more people to train in hopes that they can get some of those same benefits, right? And so it's good to have a purpose, man. I don't know. I love what you're doing with McDojo Life. I think it's awesome. I want to be cognizant of your time as well. We're wrapping up here at about 60 minutes. I like to try to keep my episodes to an hour or less so I don't bore too many people. Not that you're boring. I'm the boring one. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. I so many great points brought up. It was really fun talking with you, and I hope to do it again soon. But as I wrap up, I'm just wondering, if you want to, anything that you want to promote, where can people find McDojo Life if they want to follow you, talk a little bit more about Academy Safe, and anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, hold on. I actually do. I'm terrible about this shit. I'm like the worst influencer. Like, I don't promote shit. So I appreciate you bringing it up. So I actually wrote a book. It came out at the end of last year when I started martial arts at 12, all the way until roughly about starting McDojo Life. I wrote a book about my experience in the martial arts industry, and I used to actually compete at nightclub bars. We used to do this thing called patron boxing. So what they would do is they would set up a boxing ring in the middle of a nightclub, and anybody who wanted to fight, whether you were drunk, whether you were sober, Didn't matter. We did 2-on-2 fights, 1-on-2 fights, 3-on-3 fights, 2-on-1 fights, 3-on-1 fights. It was a wild place to be. So I started competing in boxing in those nightclubs. And so I wrote a book about my experiences there. Some crazy stuff happened. It's called Senseis, Bars, and Scars. You can get it at Amazon. There's crazy stories in there. And all of my stories, I made sure to provide a photo to go along with the story so that way you can see the truth. There's a photo of my instructor in a ball of flame. He set himself on fire accidentally in a nightclub. So there was all the nightclub events were recorded. There was a camera that recorded every last one of these events. So it was cool to have like some photo evidence to go along with it. Yeah, just wild stories that happened. So I made sure to write them in a book. So I wrote one to say that I did.
Dude, that's badass, man. I will. So I put this whole episode in video format on my YouTube channel and like long form so people can watch the episode if they don't want to listen to it. And I'll put a link up to the book for those listening. Check us out on YouTube, subscribe to us in McDojo Life. And yeah, I'll throw a link to the book for on Amazon so people can check that out as well.
I appreciate it. And finding anything on McDojo Life's easy. It's just McDojo Life and just look, it's on everything as McDojo Life. So.
Yeah, I imagine most people listening to this or that follow me probably already follow you. But if not, definitely go follow Rob at McDojo Life because he's got some great content. He's doing a lot of great things, obviously. But if you ever want to be entertained as well, obviously your videos are fucking great.
I appreciate
it. Yeah, man, it's been fun following you over the years and finally getting a chance to talk to you, like I said. And I hope to do this again with you sometime soon.
Yeah, anytime, dude. Love talking shop.
All right, brother. Follow McDojo Life, and thanks again for joining us on the wall. We'll see you next time, and go train.